Hi, I'm Brandon Bowers, pastor of New Life Church, located in Locust, North Carolina. And I wanted to say thanks for stopping by and checking out our YouTube channel. I hope that today's message is both encouraging and challenging to you and your walk with Christ. If you're in our area sometime, we would love to have you come check out one of our services, each and every Sunday at 8:45, 10:15, and 11:45. We'd love to have you come out. And I hope that you enjoy today's message. All right, well, good morning, church. All right, so listen, you're going to have to sort of forgive me a little bit this morning. I'm like really amped up because we've been on vacation. My family and I have been on vacation for 10 days, right? And so usually when I go on vacation, if I have to miss a Sunday, I'll find some other church to attend, just to sort of relax and see how other people do it. And this year I decided, I'm going to do something different. I'm just going to be like normal people. I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm not going to church. I refuse. Just not going. Listen, guys, I don't know how people do it. I went on vacation, so I missed one Sunday. I came back this morning, and I sat here during our worship in our first service. And our worship team phenomenal job this morning, right? Just phenomenal job. I sat here, and I was like a sponge, just soaking it up. Because honestly, being gone, I felt like I'd been gone forever. But having not worshiped for that 1 week, honestly, I felt like my soul was a parched land. I was like, I don't know how people do it. I know that's regular for some people, that sort of routine. That's life as normal to maybe come to church once or twice a month. That's what they do. I get that, That's sort of the way attendance goes. I just can't do it. And it's not because I'm super spiritual, and it's not because, I'm holier than anybody else. It's just, listen, I need God that bad. I need Him every single week, every single day. And man, when I miss that week of worship, it did something to me. And like I said, I just think our team, they did a phenomenal job this morning. So that's why I'm saying I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to get back, to kick off this brand new series, We Are Here. And, like Adina was saying, this sort of coincides with a We Are Here week of service here at New Life. It's one of the most exciting times, a week in my year that I just look forward to every single year. And so if you've been here for maybe less than a year, you have no idea like what this is all about. But I'm telling you, it is incredible. You see, several years ago, I came to be the pastor here in 2007. And several years ago, early on, we were way smaller than what we are. Probably about a third or less in attendance than we are right now. And like, we're not a mega church or anything, but we were really small and pretty insignificant, honestly, in our community. Back then, you could go out, and if you wanted to invite someone to church, they would receive your invitation, but the response was usually, where is that? I've never even heard of that church. We were relatively unknown in a small community. And so I came into that, and I'm thinking, gosh, we got to do something about that. Because what we were discovering was we were growing, and people were finding us, and people loved our church. They loved attending our church. They loved getting involved in our church if they could find us, if they found out about us. And so as a young pastor, I'm sitting here thinking, we got to do something about this, and I got to come up with some strategy to sort of get our name out there so that people know where we are. And so this will just prove to you how creatively genius I really am. You ready for this? And so I said to myself, self, right? Y'all talk like that way too, don't it? Don't even act like you don't. Self, we got to do something about this issue. So here's what we're going to do. On top of our normal community outreach events, things that we're doing on a regular basis anyway, let's set aside a full week every single year dedicated to community service. A full week. We go out, we love on our community, we serve our community, we ask for nothing in return, and let's call it, we are here. All right? Genius, right? Yeah. So maybe it's not so original. All right, we'll leave that to somebody else. But here's the thing. It went over big. It was huge. We had T-shirts printed up. This is this year's We Are Here T-shirt. We had T-shirts printed up. Hundreds of volunteers came out to help that week. And here's what we found. That after that first We Are Here week, things began to shift. We noticed a change. After that week, we would start inviting people in our community. And instead of getting the same, who are you, where are you from, and I've never heard of your church, we would get responses like this. Oh, you're that church that did this. You're the church that I saw picking up trash, and all of you people had the same kind of T-shirts on. You're the church that was doing something in the park last week. Things began to change, and people knew we were here. And so we're excited about this year. I think it's going to be the greatest We're Here week ever. We're switching things up, doing things a little different this year. We're going to be serving our ministry partners. We're going to be serving and ministering to our schools. We're going to honor our fire department and police department, all those personnel. We're going to bring them out for a big appreciation dinner for what they do for us every single day. And we're going to cap the week off, and this is going to be really exciting, with a free community concert hosted by our New Life worship team. So we're really excited about that. So, if you got that card that shows what we're doing, make sure you help us get the word out about that free concert. So it's going to be down in Town Center, and so it's going to be easy and accessible for everyone. It's going to be a huge event that Thursday night. It's going to be awesome. So I just can't wait for that. But something else that's a little different about this year than years past. In years past, we've simply organized some independent service events. Each night sort of had its own thing, that's the same, but there was no real theme. It was just, okay, let's serve together. Let's commit to serving. This year, I really felt compelled, and it was on my heart, to have this year revolve around and highlight and reflect the core values of our church. You might say, well, what is a core value? What's that about? Core values, those are the values that we firmly hold to, which form the foundation for who we are and what we do and how we do it. And there's 6 of them. Easy to remember, and you can commit them to memory yourself. Love, service, truth, community, generosity, and worship. Those are the 6 things that we hold closely. Those are like the gears of our church that keeps things running. And everything revolves around one or more of those core values. That's what we're all about. That's who we are as a church. And so each night is going to reflect one of those core values. And in conjunction with that, we're going to walk through one of those values each week in this series so that we're all, on the same page about who we are, so that when we go out and say, we are here, and they're like, well, who are you? We can express to them who New Life really is. And now, when I start talking about core values, there's no real particular order of those 6 things. We don't list them in any particular order, and one's more important than the other, except for one. Love. Love is always at the top. When I talk about the core values of our church, I will always talk about love first. When we express our core values in writing, love will always top the list. Because love is the core of the core values. Love is who we are as a church. Love is our top priority, a love for God and a love for people. If we don't get that one right, none of the rest matter. And so we're going to talk about love today, and we're going to be looking in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if you want to go ahead and find your way there. But, love is important It's of the greatest priority. And as a matter of fact, when Jesus was asked, which of the commandments do you consider to be the greatest? He said in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, the greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and all of your soul. This is the greatest. And the second one is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Love is the greatest. And Paul reiterates that in 1 Corinthians 13. He spends an entire chapter expounding on the topic of love. And at the end of this chapter, verse 13, here's what he says: and these three remain, faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these, love. The greatest is love. And since we're going to spend some time here in 1 Corinthians 13, let me set the context for you. Corinthians, the first letter, is one of 13 letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament to different people, different churches, groups of people, individuals. And 1 Corinthians happens to be the longest of all of his letters. And the reason for that, I believe, is because they were so messed up. The Corinthian church was a jacked up group of people, sort of like us. They had division and strife. There was sexual immorality in their church. There were theological and spiritual divisions. They had leadership problems. I mean, you name it, and they probably had that issue in their church. There were some serious issues. And they had a lot of confusion, a lot of questions about things. And as a matter of fact, if you read the entire letter, 1 Corinthians, half of the letter is simply a response to specific questions that the people had directed for Paul to answer. One of those questions happens to be about spiritual gifts. They wanted to know, what is a spiritual gift? Where does it come from? What are the spiritual gifts? And is there any gift or a number of gifts that are better than the others? How do we get them? And that sort of thing. And are they really important? Paul spends 3 chapters, chapter 12, 13, and 14, explaining spiritual gifts. Chapter 12, he talks about the church being a body with Jesus as the head. And he says, for the body to work and to function properly and efficiently, spiritual gifts must be a part. And every person needs to be using his or her own gift in that way so that the body does what it needs to do. But the gift comes from the head, from Christ, right? Then in chapter 14, he talks about the one spiritual gift that is proven over the years to be probably the most divisive and controversial, which is the gift of tongues. All right, so I don't really know where you stand or which side you're on as far as speaking in tongues and that whole kind of thing. It's not important here this morning. But Paul spends most of 14 talking about that gift and how it's to be used. But in chapter 13, like right there in the middle, is where Paul takes his strongest stand. And he makes some of his strongest points in chapter 13, a chapter that has usually been identified and called the chapter of love, the love chapter. If you've been in any wedding, you've heard reading from this particular chapter, most likely, the love chapter. And it's right in the middle of this discussion on spiritual gifts. And basically what Paul is saying is, coming out of chapter 12 and into chapter 13, the love chapter, he's saying this: listen, here's what you need to know about spiritual gifts. None of the gifts, doesn't matter which one you have, none of the gifts exalt God or edify the church without love. They're useless. And then he goes into chapter 13, basically answering and describing a person who lives life without love. An individual or even a church without love. And you got to ask yourself, how important is it? Is it really that serious of an issue? How important is love? And now I'm not talking about this, warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when somebody you're attracted to or you're affectionate toward, when they come around, your stomach gets all butterfly and it's cool. Not talking about that kind of love, right? I'm talking about spiritual, biblical, God-reflecting, self-sacrificing, Christ-like love that we can only know, experience, and share with others through a relationship with Jesus. That's the kind of love we're talking about here. Is it really that important? Well, if we were talking in terms of survival this morning, what if I asked you, what would you say are the essentials to survival? And if we took everybody's answers and we put them all together, we might say, we need food, we need water, and we need shelter. Those three things, if we have those three things, we can make it. We can survive. We've done so for thousands of years. Food, water, and shelter. Okay, and then if I were to say, okay, out of those three, which would you say is the most important? The most essential to survival? Now, if you factor out, some extreme scenarios, most of us might agree that shelter is probably the least important. The least necessary. How many of you watch Naked and Afraid? Yes. Love you guys. I'm going to watch it today and it's going to be awesome. Love Naked and Afraid. If you watch that, you understand that, these people are sort of thrown out there in the wilderness with nothing. Like when I mean nothing, I'm talking nothing. They quickly discover shelter is important, but it's not absolutely essential. Food and water are more essential. They're more important. Most doctors agree that the human body can function 40 plus days without food. I don't see how that's possible apart from a miracle of God. Like, I can't go 40 minutes without food, right? But, it's feasible to survive 40 plus days without food. But they would also agree that the human body can only survive perhaps a week, maybe a little longer, without water. So food, water, and shelter. Water is the most important. Water is the most essential resource. Without water, you're a dead man on a much shorter timeline than if you had to do without these others, right? All right, so now back to the original question. How important is love? Well, Paul sort of laid it out there for us in verse 13. He said there's three essentials to spiritual health, spiritual life, spiritual survival. He said there's faith, hope, and love. And the greatest, the most important, is love. A love for God and a love for people. It's the most important factor. Well, without love, what does life look like? See, that's how he begins chapter 13. He begins chapter 13 by describing for us a person, a life, or a church void of love. And so if you got your Bible, look at 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to read the first three verses here. Paul writes, "If I speak in tongues of angels and men, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing." Paul makes three statements here about a life without love. A church with a "we are here" week and a list of core values that doesn't include love. Or a Christian who possesses to know and follow Jesus, who plays the part and has the role down pat, but yet exhibits no Christ-like love. He describes that person. He describes that church in three statements. He says, one, greatness without love, simply annoying. greatness. A great person or a great church without love is just an annoyance. Now, I've asked this question all three services. How many of you parents, or how many of you have at least once given your child, say, a drum set or a guitar or some other musical instrument for like Christmas, birthday, or something like that? Done that? Yeah. See, you guys have made that mistake, right? Most parents at least make that mistake once. You give your child, that drum set, you give them the guitar or whatever it is they want to play, hoping, praying that it's going to, flesh out and bring to the surface some suppressed musical gene that's been buried deep within them, right? Usually it doesn't pan out that way. Just trying to warn you. What usually happens is after about a week or so of them showing no sign of talent whatsoever and no rhythmic ability, what was a good idea at first simply becomes mind-splittingly annoying. I mean, they're just strumming, and they're banging away, and it becomes a major headache. And then as a parent, you just begin to think about ways in which to get it out of the house. Like, how can I get rid of this and then direct their attention to something else, preferably something much quieter? It's just an annoyance. Unless your kid happens to be Zach Austin, right? Or like if you give a guitar to a Ryan or a Chris or anybody else on this stage who has musical ability. I mean, they have the gift, they have the ability to do something with that. What's annoying in the hands of most becomes amazing when you put it in theirs. Paul uses a similar illustration when he's talking about love. Instead of drums and guitars, he uses communication as his example. Public speaking and preaching. Because see, preaching is his life. Paul lives and dies to preach, to spread the gospel. And he admits, if you was to back up into 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul admits that he's not the best public speaker. He says, I'm not the most eloquent one in the room. As a matter of fact, Apollos was one of the pastors of the Corinthian church at one time. He says, Apollos, he's a much better preacher than I am. Like, this dude can bring it. But here's the thing. See, there was a division among the Corinthian church about who followed whom. And it all had to do with their preaching and their leadership. Some people said, well, I followed Paul. And others would argue, I followed Peter, like the first apostle. Well, I follow Apollos. He's a much better communicator than any of those other guys. And so there was division, and Paul made this statement. And he wasn't trying to hate on anybody else or anything. He simply said this, listen, it doesn't matter how great a public speaker you are. It doesn't matter how well of a communicator you are. It doesn't matter how great a preacher you are. Without love, without a love for God, without a love for the people to whom you're preaching, without a love for the message, the gospel, your preaching is at best annoying. It's like a noisy gong. It's like a clanging cymbal. It just gets on everybody's nerves, and they would rather not hear it. That's some strong words. But the same can be said about anything, anyone, or any church. Listen, no matter what you do, whether an individual or a church, it may be great, and you may be the greatest at doing it, but without love, you're more an annoyance than you are an aid. You're really doing no one any good. Paul's saying that's how important love really is. Greatness without love, simply annoying. And he makes his second point in verse 2. He says that giftedness without love is arrogant. So these first two, go hand in hand. Greatness without love is annoying. Giftedness without love is arrogant. Look what he said in verse 2. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. Nothing. He mentions the gift of prophecy here, and people like to debate about this particular gift and whether or not the gift of prophecy is still in operation today, and what is the gift of prophecy and how do you define it. And I don't want to get in that entire debate this morning. I think it would suffice for us to define prophecy by what we actually see in the Bible, like in the Old Testament, where we know that there were men and women who were deemed prophets and called prophets by God. And here's what we see. In general, the gift of prophecy is the ability, the giftedness, or call it the supernatural anointing to receive a revelation from God, especially that which pertains to the future, and to speak that revelation. That's in a nutshell the gift of prophecy. And at one point in 1 Corinthians 14, Paul says, hey, the gift of prophecy, it's held in the highest regard of all of the spiritual gifts. In other words, if you're going to seek out a spiritual gift to have, prophecy's the one you want, because it's awesome, right? But the point he makes is this: without love, you can claim to have the greatest gift in the world, but all you're going to be perceived as is arrogant. Because giftedness without love comes across as arrogance. He takes it a step further, and he starts using some what-if scenarios. So you could read this verse, what if I had the gift of prophecy? What if I could fathom all mysteries? And what if I had all knowledge? And I had the faith that I can move mountains and all of this? What if? Well, first of all, who in the world can have all knowledge? And who would claim to have all ability to understand all mysteries? Well, none of us, right? God is the only one who can understand all mysteries, and God is the only one who possesses all knowledge. But Paul's like, go with me here. All right, just play along. What if? What if I could do these things? He says, without love, you can call it giftedness. You can call it genius. Call it whatever you want. Without love, arrogance, pride, and conceit are going to be the words used to describe it. I've been thinking here lately, next year about this time, we'll be around 2 months or so from going to the polls and all of us casting our vote for who we believe should be our next American president. All right? If that's not something that you've ever done and you're not registered to vote, you need to do that. All right, it's your civil duty. It's important. But here's the thing. On the Democratic side, and I don't know who's Democrat, Republican, Independent, or whatever in here, it doesn't matter to me. On the Democratic side, it seems like right now, despite all the scandal and all the controversy over her emails and that kind of thing, it seems that Hillary Clinton is sort of the shoe-in Democratic nominee at the moment. That could change, right? But that's the way it seems now. Lord only knows who's going to run against her. Like on the Republican side, the challengers, the last time I looked, there were like 40 different individuals who were saying, I'm running for president, I'm running for the office, or I'm thinking about it. 40. And so they got to come up with one person that they're going to put up against Hillary Clinton. Well, at the top of all of the polls right now, as it stands, at the top of, by a large margin, is none other than Donald Trump. Don the Phenomenon is, I swear that needs to be his campaign slogan. Because it seems like everything he touches right now just turns to gold, and sometimes like literally. Because let's just be honest, it doesn't really matter what you think about Don, whether you like him or not. As a real estate tycoon, man, he's good. He's good at what he does. You may not agree with his practices, you may not agree with his personality or anything, but you got to admit, this man's gifted when it comes to business. Anybody who can go to the brink of bankruptcy, of losing it all, and bounce back to be one of the world's billionaires, hey, kudos to that guy. Like that's a gift. That's an ability that most people don't have. And if you listen to Donald, like, he's edgy. He doesn't mince words, like he doesn't play around. He just says what's on his mind, whether anybody likes it or not. And you know, if you're actually listening to him, you may find that he says some really good things. Like, he has some good ideas. The problem is, and this is what I think will keep him from becoming our next president. And I could be wrong. I'm no political scholar or anything. There's a lot more people out there that know stuff about this, much smarter than me. The problem I see with Donald Trump, and the reason I think that he won't make it, is while what he says represents a vast crowd of American people, you know, a lot of people agree with him. And what he says represents the way they think and the way they feel. They like what he says. They like what he says he would do if he were in office. The problem is his perceived arrogance. They hate the way he says it. Can't stand it. And because of that, they will throw their support behind someone else. Because of his perceived arrogance. He's gifted, but his arrogance will kill him. And so now, we're not running for president. At least I don't think. Is anybody in here one of the 40? It could be. Daryl, take his run. All right, so we're not running for president, but the point is the same. Paul is making a point here. And he's saying, listen, you can be as gifted, you can be as great as they come, but without love, annoying and arrogant is all you'll ever be described as. It's that important. And like I said, Paul's making three statements here about life without love. He said greatness without love is annoying. Giftedness without love is arrogant. And then in verse 3, he makes his third statement. He says goodness without love is aimless. Goodness, charitable acts, doing nice things. Goodness without love is aimless. It has no real goal, has no real purpose, and might as well be considered a waste of your time. How did I get to that? Well, look at verse 3. He says, he's still doing the what if thing. He says, if I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Now, I can't say this with absolute confidence, but it seems that maybe Paul has particular people or groups of people in his mind when he makes this statement. When he starts talking about giving, I think, well, maybe he's thinking about the Pharisees, because Jesus ripped the Pharisees over and over and over when it came to their giving. And he accused them of giving, not out of love, but out of vanity. They wanted to give for other people to see them giving, for the recognition. They wanted to be honored and applauded for their generosity. And Paul, well, he used to be a Pharisee. So perhaps he's very acquainted with their hypocrisy. Maybe he's guilty of it himself. But notice here, he doesn't say simply, if I give to the poor without love, it doesn't really profit me anything. He says, if I give all that I possess. You see, there's a lot of people who give to the poor. Maybe you give to some charitable organization. There's a lot of people who do that. How many of us are willing to give everything we own I mean, that's extreme, right? He's using an extreme illustration. What if I were to give everything that I own to the poor? And then he sort of takes that extreme example to another level, and he says, well, what if I were to sacrifice my body to the flames? So he's talking about not just extreme generosity, but extreme sacrifice. Maybe he had in his mind then, in the Old Testament, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These were three guys who, Nebuchadnezzar set up this statue of gold. And everyone was commanded to bow down and worship. And they said, we're not going to do that. We don't believe in that. And he says, well, if you don't do it, you're going to be thrown into this fiery furnace. And they said, that's fine with us. Like, whatever it takes. Whatever punishment you have to dole out, we'll take it. But we're not going to worship that idol. Paul says, what if I were to do something like that? Extreme sacrifice. And he's saying, without love, be it extreme generosity or extreme sacrifice, it's all for nothing. It's all for nothing. Because consider here who the focus is on. The focus, is it on the giver or the receiver? It's on the giver. Because Paul says, if I give all I possess, or if I sacrifice myself, without love, I gain nothing. Now, obviously, the receiver, with or without love being in the equation, if they are being given something, well, they receive a benefit. If you don't have much and I give you something, it doesn't really matter if I love you or I don't. You still have the benefit and the value of whatever it is I gave you. Paul's focus is on the giver. Because, see, I think he has in mind here what Jesus said. It's more blessed to give, to be the giver, than it is to receive, to be the receiver. See, there's an inherent blessing in giving. But that blessing is only acquired, if the giving is done in the right motivation, and that motivation is love. Paul says extreme generosity and extreme sacrifice. Without love, it's of no profit. It's of no value. I gain nothing. It's aimless. I might as well keep my money to myself. I might as well keep sacrifice to myself, because there's no real point. It profits you nothing. See, I hope what we're learning here this morning is the importance of this thing called love. That we understand this morning that love is not something that should be just disregarded, to be considered insignificant. That all of our core values, this is the most essential and most important quality of them all. You see, Paul said, when it comes to spiritual health, when it comes to spiritual survival, there's three essentials: faith, hope, and love. And the most important one, the greatest of these, is love. Here's the way I'd put that in this message. Paul said, what if I had the faith to move mountains? He said hope is one of the most essential qualities. Here's the bottom line. Even if you have the faith to move mountains, and you have the hope to change the world, without love, you'll do neither. You'll do neither.